Yes, I sometimes say I was born into this field. I was born to do the work that I'm doing because my parents were an interfaith couple, kind of on the leading edge of what is now, a lot of people. And it was unusual when I was growing up. So I think that forced me to do a lot of thinking about what it means to be from an interfaith family. What are the advantages? What are the disadvantages? And a lot of thinking about my own identity. And then when I married and had kids, of course, a lot of thinking about how one raises children in an interfaith family. And for us, that's interfaith next generation, because my kids are now part of 3 generations in an interfaith family. I took my personal experience and my interest in this, and I kind of melded that with my professional experience was as a journalist. I was a reporter at Newsweek for 3 years, and then because of my husband's work in international relief and development, we ended up spending 3 years in West Africa in a Muslim country, and then 3 years in Brazil. And I was a stringer, a freelance, writing for many publications from 3 different continents. I thought to myself, interfaith families, that's a good story. It's something like 25% of Americans now who are married are in interfaith marriages. It's not something we can overlook. And what's interesting to me is that people from interfaith families are now kind of rising into levels of leadership, either as clergy themselves or in religious institutions or in other arenas of life. And we're beginning to hear their voices and hear their stories. It used to be that if you were from an interfaith family or in an interfaith marriage, it wasn't necessarily something you talked about a lot because there was disapproval in society. Now it's almost become the norm. There are different levels of decision making that occur. The parents make a decision about how they want to raise their children, but anybody who's had children knows by the time they're about 5 or 6, they start expressing their own opinions about things. And really, we don't have control over how our children identify as adults, because all of us are on these journeys. People disaffiliate, reaffiliate, change religion, leave religion. And that has nothing to do with being from an interfaith family. That's all of us who go through that. As interfaith parents, we don't know how our kids are going to end up. My parents, for instance, my father was Jewish, my mother was Episcopalian. They had grandchildren being raised Jewish, grandchildren being raised Catholic, and grandchildren being raised with Judaism and Christianity both. So 3 sets of grandchildren being raised 3 different ways. So they didn't have control over that. My work is to help every interfaith family find the pathway that's going to work best for them. And it really is different for each family. It depends on what each of you believe, what each of you practices, what are your resources, what are the communities available to you locally. Not everybody has a certain kind of Christian community they might want to join, or a certain kind of Jewish community that they might want to join. It's interesting to see that young people often are not choosing to affiliate with any congregation. And again, that's not just interfaith kids, that's all kids under 30 now. There's a huge increase in people who are simply seeing themselves as secular, do not think that the benefits of going to church every Sunday morning or going to synagogue every Friday night outweigh whatever they see as the drawbacks. It's going to be interesting to see going forward to what degree we're becoming a more secular community, as a lot of the European countries have done. But for an individual family, you have, if you're going to join a community, you make a commitment then to raise the kids with that education, with those practices, up to an age when either the kid rebels or they grow up and they follow in that pathway, or they choose a different pathway. So I think religious institutions are trying hard to catch up with the demographic reality of the fact that people are marrying across these lines of faith. And also just working on being more welcoming and inclusive as they are being with LGBTQ families, with interracial families, with our whole of humanity that exists. A lot of my work now is about seeing interfaith families in a new light, because really a lot of the books that were written, a lot of the op-eds that were written, a lot of the advice that you would get from clergy or from family or from neighbors was really negative for decades. And interfaith families were just seen as a problem. What do we do about them? How do we stop them? And I think because I come from a happy, really well-adjusted interfaith family, it's given me a different lens. And so what I try to do is to create space for people to tell their stories, to talk about the pleasures, the richness, the complexity of those interfaith families, and how to see them as something that can be beneficial, how to learn from them, how to honor them, rather than simply seeing them as problems.